in trying to figure out what to
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
a limit to what we can show
Sure.
in this time.
Okay, so maybe we will start talking, and then as we
Yeah, I
move
would
on,
prefer to do that too.
you'll just point to the boxes.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I'm working as I wrote to. I'm trying to produce a work of history that tries to show where some of the initial intellectual impetus for ideas like interactivity or participation, where it actually comes from, right? And now we take a lot of those things for granted.
Yeah.
When we talk about media, and we assume that it needs to be personalized, it needs to be interactive, it needs to be responsive. But of course, people like you had to make a case and argue that we actually want more participation and we want more.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to map out that space, and for me, intuitively, it seems that cybernetics obviously played a big role in kind of introducing some of those ideas to the public debate, but also how then those ideas travel through various fields, whether it's psychiatry, or whether it's architecture, or whether it's design of artificial intelligence. I mean, that to me is also something very interesting. So to look also at the ways in which these ideas then enter different fields and were picked up by various communities. Then how it then connects to video and McLuhan is something we can look into. But I'm just throwing a lot of things on the table, but that's the sort of very broadly what I'm trying to wrap my head around, right? So in your case, there are all sorts of questions I have with regards to how did you make the transition from the work you were doing in family therapy and psychiatry to cybernetics. How did you end up at MIT? Then what brought you close to McLuhan? There are all sorts of questions about McCullough, but I don't want to throw all of them. So just why don't you talk?
Well, how much time do you have?
It's all up to you. So I'm free today, and then tomorrow I'll be more than happy to come back. So
yeah, okay.
As you get tired, we can stop and I can look at some of the files.
We get tired when we're tired, so that's fine if you have time.
I'm free. I have nothing else for today. So.
Okay, maybe we go get some food afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I'm going to start, I will do the opposite to what other people do. I start at the beginning, which is, for me, the present time. It's always the beginning for me, because I live in this future world. And I wonder what is going to happen after the crisis. The crisis is coming. There's no way to avoid that. And it's a serious crisis. And we know for what's happening in the Arctic, what's happening in the Antarctic, what's happening in the money, what's happening in so many fields are all ending up in a pile of shit, you could say, and not functioning. And part of that is, I'll just quickly take it. Harold, it's not a good time for me now. I'm busy right now with something I have to do. Okay. We can talk another time. So, the question that I have, on my birthday, my 90th birthday, we had a big party. It wasn't a party. It wasn't like 90th birthday to other people. I said, no alcohol, except maybe a little. No food, except maybe a little. None of the usual things for a birthday party. I'm 90 years old. The celebration I want is that people should think deeply
Mm-hmm.
about what comes after the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
What comes next? We know that things are difficult and they're likely to be much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I make that assumption.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it's not true. So then the question is, what comes next
Mm-hmm.
after that? And where do we go? You know, we started to move through all these, actually from the 1930 and the Macy Foundation lectures
Mm-hmm.
and the Macy Foundation meetings,
Mm-hmm.
which I'll talk about in a few minutes. We started a whole new way of being,
Mm-hmm.
and we managed it. And it's fine. This is what I call the world of the Mickey Max.
Yes.
And it's a mechanical world which is designed as machines, and it goes. These machines get bigger and bigger, and then they get to be very large and very clumsy,
Mm-hmm.
and taking people into strange places where the woman is making a shoe, and she's dancing around the machine making the shoe
Mm-hmm.
to get the shoe leather in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
And she's constructing a shoe.
Mm-hmm.
She's also destructing her body.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this because we were in the factory to see it,
Mm-hmm.
and we saw this woman doing it. And so what I say has to do with what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
It's thinking, but it's not just thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot has to do with action. And so at this point, as I see it, the mechanical world still rules.
Mm-hmm.
But it rules, as you have said in your papers, in your articles, it rules in a way that's very destructive.
Uh-huh.
Because it's the old thinking with the new tools.
Mm-hmm.
And that started a long time ago. I think that at the Macy Foundation meetings,
Mm-hmm.
they had another vision.
Mm-hmm.
And then the vision they had was of making machines that were not just like brains,
Mm-hmm.
but they were the machines that allowed people to experience at a distance,
Mm-hmm.
allowed people to come closer to themselves
Mm-hmm.
and have a good society. But then, from this tradition prior to that,
Mm-hmm.
there were the bosses, only there were the kings and the queens and the noble people and the owners and there were the serfs.
Mm-hmm.
So that tradition, in a sense, continued in a changed form when we had mechanization. You had the arms and the muscles
Mm-hmm.
all put into the machines. And these muscles
Mm-hmm.
were the artificial muscles using steam and coal and
Sure.
so on. So, but now we've got a new, and we had then the bosses of the bosses who were just a continuation of the old.
Mm-hmm.
And but now they were owners of factories,
Mm-hmm.
and not just owners of land and serfs and all that, slaves.
Mhm.
So then when they were developing the ideas of cybernetics, at least some of them were going in the direction of finding freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But others were not. They were interested in, as always, necessity is so important.
Mm-hmm.
The necessity was to make new kinds of armaments, new kinds of means of making war. And that's not what this was all about.
Mm-hmm.
But the Germans were attacking, and they had the capacity to make a missile which wasn't just shot from artillery and had no capacity to really
Sure.
So then they basically they had to make these, and Norbert Wiener and Warren. I don't think Warren was involved particularly with that side, but Wiener was, and then IBM was. So again, the sad thing is that the mechanizing people, IBM, really took over cybernetics. And as I see it, I couldn't prove it, but as I see it, they started, when I was at MIT, for example, they had these terminals. So, and these terminals were typewriters, IBM terminals, for sending messages from one place to another. But they had, when I said, well, you know, why don't we make something which is not just the old terminal for the new technology, but let's change the terminal too. And nobody thought that was important. So that the contact with this new technology, the kind of how you get into it, was these terminals. And the terminals were the old terminals which were inefficient and had no capacity to adjust to the speed or adjust to the amount of pressure you used, or anything. They just were the fucking old on-off terminals without any sensing whatsoever. So here we're making all these wonderful sensing systems, but they don't apply to the terminals. So I got involved with this kind of thing.
Sure.
And so after, so that sort of gives an introduction. Now, I got involved with the terminals, and then I got involved with, well, okay, what can you do with using the cybernetic interactivity and the cyclic adjustment of the capacity to relate to a particular person? And so then I went from there. So that's the background there. And then I started out in psychiatry because at medical school, I didn't know what I was wanting to do. My father was a doctor, and he wanted me to move into the he had a second empty office next to his in the house he built. And I didn't want that. And so I thought I might be a surgeon, and with my father's help, we tried to get me involved with him with Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And but I was to be an extern there. And then I realized that, I don't know anything about psychiatry, and here's something new. I like new things. So I talked to this man I phoned somebody, Professor Malmud, and I asked him, it could be interesting to come there and talk to you. I talked to him, and then I wasn't sure what's going to happen. Then I got the letter from Mount Sinai that you can become an extern. And at the same time, Malmud called me and said, you come and work on a program, training program. So I made a great list of which one do I prefer, etc. And I ended up going in the psychiatric program, teaching program. Well, this was new too, because you see, the psychiatric training program was entirely different than any training that had ever been before psychiatrists. Because these people were not just teaching the old psychiatry, they were teaching the new psychiatry. And it wasn't just Freudian psychiatry. Freud had opened the field, but Malerman himself was an eclectic person. He didn't really involve himself in that. So I had 3 years of that, and then I had 2 years with child psychiatry. And then it was, again, necessity is the mother of all things. I got a job as assistant director of a big clinic right away. And then the man who was director fell and broke his leg. So I was the director of this big clinic. And so essentially, then I stayed there during the medical draft to the war in Korea. Yeah. And they were trying to get me all the time, and I was always vital because I was the assistant director of this big thing. And
but you were Canadian, so I mean.
No, I moved over to the United States and decided I'd be an American.
So you had the American citizenship at that.
I got American citizenship, and I kept my Canadian actually, but, which was illegal, but so. And then I was okay until I'd been there for a number of years, and about 6 years, I think. And then I'm not sure of these facts. I'd try can check it out. But in any case, then they were going to get me. And the last thing I wanted to do was go to this war, this strange place, which had nothing to do with anything that I could imagine being of value. It's just made stupid. And so then I decided, after thinking about it a while, public health service. Because you could do the public health service instead of military. So on this basis, I got a letter back from the National Institutes of Health, the leader there, in family studies at NIH. And he just said, come for an interview. And so I had this interview with the man who wanted me to go to the penal colony, I call it, for drug abusers or for people who stole from the mail, etc. And instead I got family therapy, and I spent a number of years there. And then I found that family therapy is very good, and certainly much better than individual therapy for certain kinds of cases. And I had already started doing some psychoanalysis in Boston. So I decided that, I should very well go beyond this business of family therapy and transitions. And I realized that what I'm interested in is not the therapy of the family. I was interested in how does the family operate, and what's it all about. As individuals, you can talk to the person, but as family, you can watch them, and that's very important. So you watch them, and you sort of get a feeling for what's going on, which is more than they can talk about, because they don't have words for it. You see a couple, and you know that you feel the relationship. But what they say may have nothing to do with what their real relationship is. So I got into thinking, well, I have to go beyond this family therapy. And I'm living in Washington at that time. I worked my way up into the Georgetown. I had a big house, 5 stories in Georgetown. You know, this tall thing.
Yeah. I spent some time in Georgetown myself.
Yeah, well then, you know, probably know it's on, oh gosh. Well, anyway, it was in Georgetown, a gas station on the street. There's a streetcars in the old days.
They're gone now. It's just 10th Street.
Hancock Street.
Yeah.
What's that?
Anyway.
No, that was in Boston.
No, N. I said N. You know, N Street. It's
Yeah, it doesn't
the tram, but yes.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I really liked that. But then I'm sort of saying it worked out quite well. But then with this family therapy and all of that, I said, no, finish with that. And my wife and I were not getting along also. That was another part of it. And so I decided that I will try to move to doing something more interesting, and had in mind something which would have to do with what is going on when people are together. What's the biological aspect of it? And I'd already, through Martin Schubeck, I don't know if you know Martin.
No.
He's one of those people who started game theory.
Schubeck.
Schubeck, S-H-U-B-I-K. Martin, and he and I were buddies. We grew up together. He'd come over from England during the war.
Sure.
And so Martin knew Seymour and
Papper.
Seymour Papper, and also Minsky. So, because Martin and Minsky were sort of working together.
Sure.
So I got the feeling that I am going to work at MIT and try and get at the fundamentals. Now, what is happening in the family?
Sure.
So then...
And you work on the blind children, and that was happening.
That was when I was in Washington.
Yes.
And I have a diary on them that whole time. And...
but that didn't fit within the family therapy part, with the blind children study.
No, not really, except that that was my concern about perception.
Yes.
I needed to know more about perception.
But this is something that you volunteered to take on? It didn't wasn't imposed on you by
I volunteered to take on. And it was quite fascinating to me. Because you get into the depths of perception. What is this perception, you know?
Sure.
Is it just seeing? Is it just hearing? Or is there more to it than that? In other words, I come from the simplicity of the mechanical age into the complexity of going beyond the mechanical age into the cybernetic age. Whereas complexity is something which is manageable to some degree. And so anyway, I was curious about these people.
Sure.
And I'd also, I think it comes just a little bit. Anyway, Warren sent me around. I met Warren, and he and I somehow clicked. And it is strange because I am not a mathematician, and I'm not an engineer. And but we liked each other.
Sure.
And he took me as his student. He had one person each year that he took as his student, you might call it, a colleague, I don't know.
Sure.
And but in order for him to do that, he decided that, you know, I'm not sure I want you to. I'm not sure you really want to do this. So he sent me overseas
Uh-huh.
to visit the people that he thought were
Uh-huh.
his colleagues. So Gordon Pask
Sure.
and there was Gordon and there was
Louis, who?
Gordon Pask.
Yeah, I know, but then you said the second
The
name.
other one was in Scotland.
Uh-huh.
His name I can't recall at the moment.
So you visited him in Scotland.
Yeah, it was one of the beginners of cybernetics in Scotland. Have you come across him?
I mean, I don't know which of them was Scottish. Was he doing computers or more of the? There's a fellow there with the last name George, Frank George, I think. Then which of them was Scottish? I don't know. I mean, Gordon Pask was very close to Stafford Beer, whom I don't know if you ever met him.
Yeah, I met Stafford Beer after the crash, after his dream was.
In Chile. You know, I wrote a very long article about Stafford Beer.
I know.
For the New Yorker.
I must say one thing. I should begin with this. I think you're a wonderful writer.
Well, thank you.
Because I would never, I am trying to talk to you in a way that tells you about me without holding back. I can tell you a lot more, but
sure.
Because I think you have the connections and you have the capacity, and what you did in that writing was that you set up something that people get in a yes, no, bad, good question, and then you moved it into I got to think about this as I read, which most people don't think it. They just read, and then you ended up with opening a territory which was meaningful to people because they had this background, because you'd done. And I thought it was really beautiful writing.
Oh, thank you. It took a lot of work. I went to his archives also in Liverpool, so I had to spend some time digging through his papers, but it was a meaningful work. So you met Gordon Pask and
I met Gordon Pask, this other guy, and
it's approximately 63, 64?
Yeah, about that. I think maybe earlier, 60.
When did you move to Boston?
Let's see.
I think in your biographies you state
it
was
think
64.
Then we take that. Anyway, it was.
So you went to England and Scotland. That was your overseas trip.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And interviewed by the people he suggested. And it came back positive. Gordon and I got along fine. Gordon is. I can tell you more about these people.
I would love to, yes.
Because, you see, I'm not a technician. I'm a person.
Sure.
And I get to know them. And Gordon was a lovely guy. Anyway, we won't get distracted at the moment with that. Come back to it. And so anyway, Warren said, okay, you sit here. So he was sitting in his desk and he had another chair. He said, that's where you're going to sit next year.
Jerry Visner. Jerry, you said Jerry.
No, he said, you, Warren, this is Warren McCulloch now.
Yes.
He said, you're going to be my...
Okay.
So I was very pleased. But he also said he had no money. But I said, well, I have some money. So he then later he found a job for me at NASA. And so I got some money from that. And I was working at NASA then. You see, the necessity is part of all this.
Yes. And at NASA you were working on the design of the isolated environment for the astronaut, or?
No, I really, well, partly that, the psychological aspects of it. And partly it was the problem of if Warren wanted me to go to India and learn about how the gurus in India are able to put themselves to sleep for in a hole and stay out of contact and live in a minimal way. And I looked for that, and I couldn't find a damn thing. You know, I'd have to go.
And they wanted to somehow incorporate that into NASA research.
That was part of it. Then there's the problem of if an astronaut hasn't enough oxygen, then he becomes slightly crazy, and he can lie and carry on in manners which are destructive. So how do you know if the guy is in good shape or not? If he's lying. So I had that problem. And then I had the job of looking through some of the stuff that was sent in for NASA funding. And that was very fascinating. And Seymour and his friends got some money through that. So then that went very well. But my wife was at that point getting really upset because she had made some friends in Washington, which I didn't particularly like, and looking at a lifestyle which was a Beacon Hill lifestyle, which I didn't like. And I was feeling miserable. So we decided there's no money at MIT, so or very little. So we went there, and she managed anyway, but she wanted to live in a hotel rather than buying anything. And anyway, I won't go into any details, but it's just the being there, it really shifted my way of thinking considerably. Warren was such a beautiful man, and together, you know, he introduced me to all his friends, and he acted as if I knew all about cybernetics, which I knew very little. And
can I just ask you a question? When you were still doing your family therapy work, were you already reading Bateson or no?
Bateson.
Because his big book on communication came out in 1952, the one with Ruich. So, I mean...
No.
You know, the Palo Alto School was already doing kind of...
Yeah, well, I was...
Oh, that came later?
I think it came later. Yeah, because it came later.
Okay. So we can
so
go back.
Bateson was Bateson was in the Macy Foundation.
Along
with Macy, along with his woman,
Margaret Mead.
And
but you're still at MIT. Let's not break the chronology.
And I stayed for the year with Warren, working with him, and it, you know, I learned cybernetics because I was swimming in cybernetics with him, and we went to his house in on the coast. Old Lyme, yeah. And it was such in Rook. It was a lovely woman. They had been in the old days. They were very much involved with the psychiatric milieu, and Warren hated it. He really disliked all that.
And he disliked psychoanalysis, especially, as far as I know.
because he thought it was all just nonsense. And he had been badly hurt, I think, earlier, because he was member of a group of people. In those days, there was groups of people who talked about everything with each other, and it was sort of a kind of a fad at the time, and he came out badly out of that, and the details I don't know, but he really disliked it all, and
he didn't believe in the unconscious either, as far as I remember.
I don't think he made any big deal of it.
Okay.
He just didn't involve it. He just thought that Freud and the whole nonsense, because of course he was involved with the brain and physical brain.
Sure.
So.
But he knew that you already had some background in psychoanalysis. You were not just a sort of
and I continued
brain person.
in Boston. I started in Boston actually. So.
So he tolerated that side of you. He tolerated the psychoanalytic side of you.
Well,
Warren tolerated it.
But my psychiatric side is psychoanalysis was. I wrote. In the end, I wrote from my studies in family therapy a paper which was called about narcissism.
An externalization, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was in Washington. And it ended up with, I was sitting in this conference when Anna Freud came to this meeting, and she was going to talk to all of the psychoanalysis sort of psychoanalysts came along from many parts of the country. And early in the meeting, there was a man next to me. I think he was from one of the cities, Philadelphia or something like that. And I asked him where he came from, and he told me. And he looked at me and, garbage. I must have said something that upset him anyway. I have that capacity. And then Anna Freud came in and started her talk. And then after she started talking about me, and he whispered to me, who's this guy, Brody? I said, that's me. Who's one of those high moments of life, So after that, I was invited to be a research director for the Psychoanalytic Institute. And I, not in retribution, but I had sort of got full up with psychoanalysis, and I said, well, I think that Freud was a wonderful man in his time, but I don't see why I should be doing research on something which is so old, Victorian.
Sure.
So anyway, to go on with the story, we got to with Warren. So I had part-time with NASA. And then after the year was up with Warren and the situation with NASA was, my wife was, she really wanted money. And she wanted it. She wasn't willing to live poor. So it's no big trouble for me. And kids were fine. And so then I took the NASA job, knowing that if I used more of the money I was consulting. I consulted more hours than I couldn't go on the second year. So that was, and so then since I was a psychiatrist and had spent a lot of time with Nicholas Negroponte.
Sure.
So
That I would like to know more about also.
Nicholas and I were good friends.
When did you meet? At MIT when you came?
At MIT when I came, yeah.
Was he a student or already faculty?
He was just beginning.
So he started as a professor in 66, 67, so he must have been
I think he was a student at that time.
Okay.
And basically he's the one who later on took and dumped all the stuff to my mind, into IBM.
Yes.
And into doing digital, because it was analog and digital.
Yes.
So I said, we don't necessarily want to cut everything up into pieces. He said, so you take small pieces, it doesn't cut everything up into pieces. So I said, no. Anyway,
So you got to know him and you had lots of conversations? I mean, how?
Many conversations with him, yeah. But not about... more about the interactivity. And not about digital, not digital, because that came later.
Yes.
He was a kid and I was sort of his teacher. And even bringing him over from architecture to architecture in
machine group.
And it was, he was an intellectual in the sense that I really liked and he liked me. So.
And you had some exposure to architecture at MIT other than Negroponte at the time, or he was your main link? I'm just trying to understand the context in which you wrote your 1967 article on intelligent environments. Where does it come from? Because it mostly deals with matters of architecture. Like, what's the context? Why do you move into that space, so to say?
Well, the first one I really wrote on...
Sound and Space, you also did that, of course.
Sound and Space, yeah.
So this sets you up as a...
Yeah, the Sound and Space, and I was always interested in architecture.
And the question of space, where does it come from? Does it come from some of the work you've done with Hall, or it came before? Is it non-human environment of Harold Searle? What is it?
Hall and Birdwhistle and Sheffer.
Yes.
And I was close to these guys in Washington. And
Harold Searle? No, yes.
I knew him.
Yeah. But the non-human environment book, did it register at all? Or
no, I don't.
Because also McLuhan quotes it, and I think Edward Hall quotes it, that book. The Non-Human Environment. It's a book he published in 1960.
I read the book. I know that.
Yeah, sure.
Because I remember it, and I met him. But I don't remember him too well. I was getting cold. Are you cold?
No, I'm okay. But if you're cold, we can... I have a lot of clothes on me also, so...
Yeah. Okay.
Just check if it's the recording.
I think what I do...
Is my recording?
No, I just listen, yes.
No, if you want to turn it on more, I mean, for me, it's
no,
we can switch it to number 3 if you want.
It's on 3 now.
It's on 2.
Okay.
Should I put it to 3?
Yeah.
All right. So the question of space. So it comes from the guys you met in Washington and worked with them, yes?
Yeah.
So this problematization of space and the sensorium, if you will, it happens in Washington, right? You start thinking about the senses and perception and space.
Well, it's not only that. There was two things. One, the patience when you see a family, they're interacting in space, and when you get to, you're not just talking, you're watching, and you're feeling the energies. The space becomes very important, and then you start to think about what kind of spaces do people want to live in, and what is the effect of the space, and when you walk down the hall with the blind children, I also met, you walk down the hall, and how do you're reading a book when you're blind. So how do you walk down the hall when you're blind? Like you walk like a blind man? Well, in some ways, yes. You're getting the resonance from your shoes on the floor. You're getting the resonance from your breath on the walls. The resonance. The blind people taught me a lot about space. And haven't found my notes from the blind people. I have somewhere. I have some of it. Yeah, I do have it.
You have that not the blind study, pilot study. No, that's not it. Okay.
No. I had. You see, I also spent money. I had a group of very intelligent. I said to my secretary, I wanted, if I'm going to understand children as a child psychiatrist, which I was, then I need to be able to understand intelligent children. So I put up some money, and we had meetings with high IQ kids. And they taught me a lot about high intelligence in their life.
Sure.
And I came to, if I want to work with blind children, it's obvious I should talk to expert blind people. And so I had another friend who worked somewhere in the government, and he knew about a project where they had taken blind people to listen to Russian broadcasts.
Not the colleague of Hall, not the Traeger, whatever his name was.
No, this is something you know. I don't think this was
somebody else.
Secret. So I had a group for 2 years of these blind people, extremely skillful blind people. Only had one. His one ear wasn't working, but he still managed to ride a bicycle in the city. I mean, this is the kind of thing. And so they taught me a lot about space.
And this is the project in which you worked with Hall, or no? The two year
Hall came in. Hall came in, and I was working with this. And he said, "Well, why don't I come and watch you and be with you?" I said, "Boy, that's great."
So and by that time, he already published his famous book, so he already had a reputation.
Yeah.
1959.
I can tell you more about Hall. And
sure. Well, we'll come back. Yeah, let's get the big story. Yes.
But Hall was another beautiful man. And I kept my relationship when he was in the West, and we went down into the canyons and things like that together. So lots of stories. But anyway.
So let's go back to MIT. So Nicholas Negroponte.
Yeah. And
you talked to him about interactivity. You published this article, 67. Did anything happen before? I mean, I just jumped to 67 because that's when the article came out, but maybe we're missing something in between.
What was the name of the article?
The soft architecture, soft architecture. I think it's you published it, and I have it somewhere here. It's actually the article that a lot of people who now do architecture are still quoting. So in the architecture community, that's probably the article of yours that's still read widely, and that's also the article that Negroponte and everybody else then began quoting. So it became a reference point in this debate about intelligent environments. And it's still read today by people doing design. Probably has a lot of other stuff in it. It's just 4 pages or something like that.
Yeah.
It's very short.
Yeah. Right. So,
so you got, let's also try to get the facts straight. So you are still thinking what to do with NASA, right? Like your situation is now.
No, the soft architecture I think came before that.
Well, I think this is 67, so autumn 67 is what it says here. So
no, it's 67. So as I say, I have the difficulty of not being very expert with dates.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, the dates here are just
I have to figure it out.
Yes.
Each time.
No, I'm just trying to sort of grasp the. So you moved to Boston approximately in '64. You spent some time consulting with NASA. You do some work with McCullough.
Yeah, with
you do something with the camp at MIT.
Yeah, that came after the go back. Where were we?
Well, we're still trying to get sort of the broader, longue durée kind of macro perspective of your trajectory, so to say. So you start getting involved with cybernetics, and I guess, did you spend some time in the artificial intelligence lab with Bob Parrott and Minsky at the time, or not much? So you visit them?
There was I spent a lot of time there hanging out with them. And I just, it was a time when they were doing all the work on the eye. And I just hung around and made my suggestions, and some of which they were interested in, and some of them were not. And got involved with the question of, looking, and as opposed to seeing.
Sure.
And also the fact that that 2 units would be easier to build than 1. And because the 1 has this single line of vision, and 2 has a broad field of vision, and then looking becomes important. With 1, it's not really looking, because you're only getting one line in.
Sure.
And 2, of course, they say, well, if you're going to have 2, you can have 2 ones. And that's what they decided.
So this is where some of your later work on visual prosthesis comes from.
Yeah. And I was very interested in that. And also related to the blind. Because how are we going to help blind people?
Sure.
And so let's take a holiday for a bit. I'm getting a bit
tired.
Yeah.
Sure. What should we?
Let's talk about something else and come back to it.
All right.
So tell me more about yourself.
Oh, me. Well, I mean, I grew up in Belarus, and so I was born in what was then still the Soviet Union, in a very small town, and mining town. So my entire family is in mining. then mining potassium and then turning it into fertilizers.
Yeah.
So when I was 17, I won a scholarship to go and study abroad. So I went to another post-socialist country, Bulgaria. So I spent 4 years in Bulgaria in a very small place there at an American university, and they set it up after the fall of communism in a small Bulgarian town. So I spent 4 years there, and eventually got out and moved to Berlin and spent 3 years in Berlin doing various things, including working for a non-governmental organization that began sort of using what was then called social media, blogs, social networks, wikis, podcasts to train journalists and political activists and people working in NGOs to fight, to campaign, to push against power. And, the hope was that we can break through some of the, now reading some of the literature